I always enjoyed renting out my house on Airbnb. My name is James, and I live in a charming house in the suburbs of Dallas. The house has a rustic yet modern decor, and I always receive compliments from my guests. I've always enjoyed interacting with different people and providing a comfortable place for them to stay. One day I received a last-minute booking from 3 men. Their names were Michael, David, and John. They seemed like professionals traveling for work, but something about their behavior made me uneasy. They arrived in a rental car and were quite friendly at first, asking about the best places to eat and local attractions. But as we talked, I noticed their smiles didn't reach their eyes. The first night passed without incident, but the feeling of discomfort remained. The next morning, I received a message from them. They complained that the water in the basement wasn't working. I found it strange since I never had plumbing issues. I decided to check the problem myself, thinking I could quickly resolve it. When I went down the stairs to the basement, I felt a chill down my spine. The main light wasn't working, so I used a flashlight to illuminate the way. As I reached the bottom, I saw the 3 men waiting. Michael said they tried to turn on the water but couldn't. Something was wrong. The tension in the air was palpable. As I approached to check the pipes, David positioned himself behind me, and John stood to the side. Michael kept talking, but I was focused on his hands, which were moving restlessly. Suddenly, he asked if I was alone in the house. My heart raced. Lying, I said my wife would arrive any moment. They laughed, but it was a cold laugh. Michael finally revealed a gun. I felt my body freeze. He ordered me to hand over my wallet and phone. I obeyed without hesitation. I tried to stay calm, but my body was trembling. After taking my belongings, they said I could go. I ran upstairs, fear overwhelming me. When I reached the upper floor, I locked the basement door and called the police. While waiting, I tried to process what had happened. Why did they let me go? And why were they still in the house? When the police arrived, we conducted a thorough search. We discovered that the men had used a stolen credit card to pay for the stay. Additionally, valuable items from the house were missing. My collection of antique watches, inherited from my grandfather, was gone. I felt violated, not just by the theft, but by the fact that they had invaded my personal space. The police took down the details, but there wasn't much they could do immediately. Time passed slowly, and I couldn't get the image of those men out of my mind. I was grateful to be alive, but the fear and uncertainty were overwhelming. Even with the police patrolling the area, I couldn't feel safe. I began checking the locks on the doors and windows obsessively, unable to relax. The following week was a blur of fear and anxiety. Every noise in the house made me jump. Then one morning I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of me sleeping in bed. The shock made me drop the letter. I picked up the photo again, and on the back was written, "We will be back." My heart stopped. I called the police again, but they had no new leads on the men. My mind began to imagine all possible scenarios. What if they really came back? I knew I needed to leave the house for a while, but where would I go? My nights were restless, and sleep had become a rare luxury. I started sleeping with a knife next to the bed. What tormented me was not knowing when or if they would return. The feeling of being watched never left me. My life had become a waking nightmare. Days passed, but the constant fear didn't diminish. I was becoming a shadow of what I once was. I decided to install security cameras inside and outside the house. On the first night after the installation, I woke up in the middle of the night with an alert on my phone. I went to the living room, and on the monitor, I saw one of the men, Michael, looking directly at one of the cameras outside. He smiled and disappeared into the darkness. I called the police immediately, but when they arrived, there was no sign of him. I reviewed the recordings, but it seemed like he knew exactly where the cameras were and avoided being captured on most of them. This incident was enough to convince me to leave the house temporarily. I stayed at a friend's place for a few weeks, but even there, the fear followed me. One night, I received another message. "You can't run from us." It was impossible to relax. Every time I returned to the house to pick something up, the feeling of being watched increased. In the end, I decided to sell the house and start anew somewhere else. But even after the sale, the trauma remained. Sometimes I still feel like I'm being followed. One night in my new house, I received a call. It was Michael. "It will never be over, James. We are always with you." I felt a chill and turned around, seeing a familiar shadow in the window. They had found me. I'd always wanted to visit Salt Lake City. The city seemed like the perfect destination for a solo trip of relaxation and exploration. My name is Ethan, and after months of exhausting work, I decided to take a week for myself. I found a cozy Airbnb managed by an elderly man named Henry. The house was simple, but well decorated and welcoming. When I arrived, Henry greeted me warmly, showing me the room and common areas. He seemed to be a very kind and attentive person. The first night passed without incident, and I began to feel at home. The next day, I spent exploring the city, visiting museums, and savoring the local cuisine. When I returned at night, I was exhausted, so I went to bed early. However, I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling, as if something was wrong. Around 2 a.m, I heard a creak coming from the front door. My heart started to beat faster. I got up slowly, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the hallway, I saw that the front door was ajar. I was paralyzed for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. Had Henry forgotten to close the door? I decided to shut the door and check if all the others were locked. After making sure everything was in order, I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, my thoughts racing. What if someone had entered? What if they were still there? I listened to every little sound in the house, every creak and sigh of the walls. The hours dragged on until dawn, and I finally managed to get some sleep, but the discomfort remained. The next night, I returned home earlier, still suspicious of what had happened. I made some tea to calm myself and went to bed. The house was completely silent, but the tranquility didn't last long. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. This time, the sounds were unmistakable. Someone was walking through the house. I got up slowly, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. I opened the bedroom door carefully and looked into the dark hallway. There was no one in sight, but the footsteps continued, seeming to come from all directions. I followed the sounds to the living room, where I found Henry standing with a confused look on his face. He saw me and asked what was going on. I explained about the sounds and the open door the night before. Henry seemed genuinely surprised and concerned. Together we checked the whole house, but found nothing out of the ordinary. He suggested it could be the wind or the old house creaking, but I wasn't convinced. On the third day, I decided I needed to resolve this. I bought a security camera and installed it in the hallway, pointed at the front door. Henry didn't object, saying he also wanted to ensure my safety. That night, I slept with the camera on, recording any movement. I woke up again to the sounds of footsteps, but forced myself to stay in bed, hoping the camera would capture something. In the morning, I reviewed the recordings and was terrified. Around 3 a.m, the camera captured the front door slowly opening and a dark figure entering the house. The figure moved carefully, as if it knew exactly where it was going. My blood froze when I saw the figure standing at my bedroom door for a few minutes before disappearing into the darkness. I showed the video to Henry, who turned pale. He swore he knew nothing and seemed truly scared. We decided to call the police, who came and reviewed the recordings. They found no fingerprints or any sign of forced entry, which only added to the mystery. That night, the police kept watch outside the house. I was determined to find out who was haunting us. I stayed up all night, watching the camera. Around 3 a.m, the figure appeared again. This time I was ready. I silently left the bedroom and followed the figure to the basement, where I had never been before. I opened the door slowly and went down the stairs. The figure was there, standing in the center of the basement, with its back to me. As I approached, it turned slowly, revealing a pale face and empty eyes. Before I could react, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned quickly and saw Henry, but something was wrong. He murmured, "He is my brother. He does not rest." At that moment, the figure lunged at us. I felt a sharp pain in my chest and everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital with police around me. I learned that Henry had a twin brother who had been missing for years, a disturbed man who had been hiding in the house. He had died in the basement, and his presence had never left the house. I never returned to Salt Lake City, but the nightmares still haunt me. I was on a long trip to visit friends in California, but decided to make a stop in a small town along the way. I found a nice, economical Airbnb, perfect for resting before continuing the journey. My name is Emily, and the house was a lovely 2-story residence located in a quiet neighborhood. The host, Sarah, was very welcoming and friendly, providing all the necessary instructions for my stay. The house had simple but cozy decor, with comfortable furniture and a sense of security. After a long day of travel, I took a relaxing bath and prepared for a peaceful night's sleep. Little did I know that it would be a night I would never forget. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the doorbell ring. I found it strange since I wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitantly, I went to the door and looked through the peephole. I saw 2 men, one holding a piece of paper. He seemed agitated, and his companion looked around nervously. When I asked who they were, the man with the paper said they had a reservation at the house and needed to come in. I knew this didn't make sense, as Sarah only rented the entire house to one guest at a time. Something about their behavior made me uneasy. I said I couldn't let them in and suggested they call the host. They began to insist, saying they had permission to enter. My heart started to beat faster, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I decided to call Sarah and confirm if there was any misunderstanding. As I dialed her number, I noticed through the peephole that more men were approaching. Quickly counting, there were at least 5 now, and they were trying to hide from the neighbors. Sarah answered, and I explained the situation. She was shocked and said there were no other reservations, advising me to call the police immediately. While talking to her, the men began banging on the door, demanding to be let in. I ran to lock all the doors and windows, trying to stay calm while my fingers trembled. I called 911, explaining the situation with a shaky voice. The operator reassured me, saying that a patrol car was on its way. The men outside were getting more aggressive, now trying to break down the door. I knew I needed a safe place, so I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom. I could hear the sounds of the door being forced and the men murmuring among themselves, fear spreading through my body like ice. I tried to stay calm, but every noise heightened my anxiety. I called the police again, updating them on the situation and begging them to hurry. My heart was pounding uncontrollably, and I started praying for them to arrive in time. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the front door giving way. The men entered, and I could hear them ransacking the house, breaking things, and searching for me. The feeling of being hunted was unbearable. I locked the bathroom door and huddled in the farthest corner, trying not to make a sound. The police sirens finally started blaring in the distance, but the men didn't seem willing to give up easily. They yelled at each other, grabbing my belongings and throwing everything around. I knew I was just a few feet away from them, with only a thin door separating me from real and imminent danger. The footsteps approached the bathroom. Someone tried to open the door, but finding resistance, started kicking it. Each kick made my heart stop for a second. I tried to make as little noise as possible, hiding in the small cabinet next to the sink. The sobs caught in my throat were almost impossible to control. The kicks continued, but suddenly they stopped. The police sirens were getting louder, and I heard one of the men shouting to the others that they needed to leave. There was a rush of movement, and then silence. I opened the cabinet door and slowly stepped out, my body trembling uncontrollably. With shaky legs, I opened the bathroom door a bit, trying to see if they had really gone. The hallway was empty, but the house was a mess. I carefully went downstairs, listening for any sound that might indicate someone was still there. When I reached the living room, I saw they had taken my purse, laptop, and other personal belongings. The blue and red lights from the police cars illuminated the street outside. I ran to the front door and opened it, almost falling into the arms of the arriving officers. The police took me outside, calming me while others entered the house to ensure no one was left inside. I was in shock but relieved to finally be safe. Sarah arrived soon after, desperate to know if I was okay. The police began their investigation, taking statements and collecting evidence. An ambulance arrived, and they insisted I go to the hospital for a checkup since I was visibly shaken. Sarah offered to accompany me, and I gratefully accepted. As we drove to the hospital, everything seemed like a blur. After being released from the hospital, Sarah insisted I stay at her house until I found another place to stay. I was thankful for her kindness, but still shaken and scared. A few nights later, while trying to sleep in Sarah's guest room, I heard a familiar sound: the doorbell. My entire body froze. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. Sarah woke up too, with a worried expression, and picked up the phone to call the police again. The doorbell rang again, insistently. The police arrived quickly, but when they checked, they found no one. Apparently, the men were playing with me, terrorizing me on purpose. I decided I needed to leave that city immediately. I returned to California, but even there, the nightmares haunted me. A month later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was my purse, with all my documents and belongings. There was a photo of me sleeping in Sarah's room, taken on the night of the invasion. On the back of the photo was a message: "We always know where you are." My heart raced, and my hands trembled. I never felt safe again.